If you're struggling with strategy in your business, or you feel like you need a strategy to drive better performance in your company, guess what? You're not alone. I'm going to share with you a few things to check within your business, within your strategy, to ensure your company doesn't fall into crisis mode. I've spent my entire career turning around and growing businesses, and over the last 15 years, I've been able to generate over $1 billion in value for organizations by following a system for strategy. So I'm going to point out a few things that we do in companies and that you can check within your organization to make sure you have the right things in place. So when it comes to strategy, I want to point something out. There's a difference between a strategy and a plan. A strategy is an interrelated set of choices that you make regarding where you're going to compete, how you're going to compete, and ultimately how you're going to win. In other words, strategy helps you to take all the noise and all the distraction and put it aside and focus on the most critical things that are going to deliver the biggest upside, not just for your company, but also for your customers and for the stakeholders of the business. That's really important. A plan, also known as a strategic plan, I don't know where somewhere along the way somebody took strategy and plan and they put it together, but strategic planning is completely separate. They're two separate things. A plan helps you to execute your strategy, all right? So there's a major difference. So when I talk about a strategy, I'm talking about those interrelated set of choices, those trade-offs that you're making in your company to focus on the most critical things. The plan is how you intend to execute that strategy, right? So in your business, if your strategy does not begin with a strategic problem, in other words, if you haven't defined your strategic problem, the number one obstacle that is preventing your company from growing and achieving its full potential, then this is where you may get stuck. I can't tell you how many times I go into organizations and I look at their strategy, and beyond not having a purpose and principles defined, they don't even have the number one problem defined. And I was working with a company just a few weeks ago, and the CEO said to me, Steve, I know we need to define our strategic problem, but can we just skip that for now? Because I really want to roll out the initiatives that I want to pursue with my team on, Tuesday. And I was like, okay, no, we can't do that. We can't define initiatives without defining the problem those initiatives are intending to solve. So think about the scientific method. You begin with defining a problem, and then you create a hypothesis of how you're going to overcome that problem. You go out there and run experiments, and then you make adjustments, and that's how the whole system works. The same thing is true with strategy. You have to define your problem. So I spend a disproportionate amount of time working with companies to identify their constraints, because companies can't grow past their constraints. And until they solve the constraints of their business, they're going to spend a ton of money, energy, and time spinning their wheels because the constraint's not going to go away if you ignore it. You have to solve constraints because the constraint in your business is preventing you from getting more customers. The constraint in your business is preventing you from reducing your cost structure or enabling you from bringing on better talent or whatever it may be. You have a constraint in your business and it's holding you back. So we have to solve that constraint. And the way we begin that is identifying what it actually is. So we call that the strategic problem of the company. So that's the first thing I would check. If you don't have your strategic problem clearly defined, that could be a major problem. The next thing, and I'm skipping over some of the components of our strategy blueprint because I want to get into the most common things that I see repeated over and over again, and I don't want you to fall into these traps. So beyond defining a strategic problem, I would ensure that you have clearly outlined your ideal customer profile, because the ideal customer profile is going to be at the center of your strategy blueprint. In other words, you have to identify one avatar, one dream customer that you're going to serve with your products and services, especially for smaller companies. This is a trap of a lot of startups. They try to do too many things with too many different types of customers. And it's equivalent to serving tea. Let's say you can only serve one type of tea. So you have this broad set of customers that you're pursuing, and therefore you make warm tea and you give it to those who prefer cold tea, and you give the warm tea to people who prefer hot tea. Well, guess what? They're gonna be like, what the heck is this? I like hot tea, you're giving me warm tea. And I like cold tea, and you're giving me warm tea. And you say, well, I can only do one type of tea, and I can only do one type of tea well. So I decided to go all in on warm. Well, that doesn't work. And the same thing is true in your business, especially when you're starting out. You have to get really focused on one ideal customer profile. Start from there. And when you can serve them really, really well, then you can move on and you can take on multiple ICPs. But just know that you can scale into a very large organization by serving one ideal customer profile. So with the ideal customer profile, you're going to want to identify what are their motivations and circumstances, what is the pain they are experiencing, and what's the trigger that's causing them to look for a solution, aka your product or service. Then you're going to want to understand what is the dream outcome that they want to achieve. What does winning look like for them? What does that dream outcome actually materialize into? Then once you've identified that, you're going to want to look at the obstacles that they will face along the way, the macro trends and the external forces that will also impact them, and then help to mitigate these concerns and get them to the promised land. So when you could build out an ideal customer profile, I skipped over a few things just to keep things high level, then your strategy is going to be customer centric and you're going to be focusing on the right things that drive value to your customers. And when you drive value to your customers, you're going to be able to charge more and you're going to be able to differentiate your business and scale a lot faster. So every time I work with a company, I get them hyper-focused on the customer. I can't tell you how many strategies ignore the customer, right? So I will go into businesses and I'll say, let me look at your strategy. And they'll give me a stack of documents and I'll flip through them and I'm like, where the heck is the customer? Like you don't even mention the customer in here. Your strategy is all about your company and what you're going to do, but you're not talking about your customer, who they are, and how you're going to deliver relevant and distinctive value to them. So that's the next thing that I would check. All right. And then finally, okay, if your strategy isn't working, I would ask you, are you evaluating the upside of your strategy? And this is where you have to tie in finance, right? So you can't have the tail wagging the dog. And what I mean by that is oftentimes in business, right, especially in financial operations, FinOps, companies will create a budget, right? And oftentimes the budget is based on whatever the CEO says. So the CEO says, look, we're going to grow by 20%, build a budget that shows that, all right? So just by putting in place a budget for your company for the next year and forecasting that out doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to achieve it, right? That's the tail wagging the dog. That's what I'm talking about there. Instead, when strategy and finance tie together, you come up with a strategy and then you build a forecast, a model to understand, okay, what is the financial upside of pursuing this strategy? And if your return on invested capital doesn't exceed your cost of capital, guess what? Your strategy isn't going to increase your firm value. So this is really, really important to understand. So when I'm exploring strategic options with the business, I ask myself, number one, is this option desirable? Is it practical? And is it economical? Let me illustrate this. Years ago, I was a CFO of a large construction company, and a big part of our business was building utility scale solar farms out in the middle of the desert, the massive solar farms. And in the United States, tariffs hit steel and solar panels, and we saw our business go down the toilet, right? It's just like a straight nosedive with our revenue. So we had to pivot. And therefore, we looked at Australia as another market to enter because they didn't have the same type of tariffs and they had a big initiative to move their energy source from coal to clean energy like solar. So we thought it would be a great opportunity. But we are also kicking around other strategic options. When we were doing this, we looked at all the strategies, including moving to Australia, and we evaluated them through this framework, right? So we ran them through the whole strategy blueprint that I came up with. And then we asked ourselves, okay, is this desirable? Yes. Is it practical? Yeah, we could pull it off. And is it economical? This is the finance side. We looked at our cash burn and our return on invested capital, and we said, even if we're 50% right, the returns still exceed our cost of capital, and therefore it's a thumbs up. I can't tell you how many companies that reach out to me or that I evaluate where they have a strategy, but they don't tie the financial side together. And so therefore they just have like this marketing plan or this wish list, but it's not economically practical. And if you execute a strategy like that and it's not economically practical, guess what? You can damage your business or you can even go out of business. So there are a lot of influencers out there, a lot of talking heads that mean well. I don't think they're malicious in any way, but I think they're misinformed oftentimes because they will share these growth hacks, right? These hacks with people, teaching them how to grow their business. But guess what? If you grow your company and you don't understand your working capital and what's required in order to support that growth, you could just grow yourself right into bankruptcy. So you have to be very, very careful. So those are some things that I would look for in your business if you feel like your strategy isn't working or if you're not getting the results that you want. But just know that strategy is not a one-time event. It's a system where you're constantly making tweaks. Because look, here's the reality. You're going to create a strategy. That's your intended strategy. Then you're going to go out in the real world and you're going to execute on that strategy. And that's when your emergent strategy will come about. And then you just make adjustments along the way. So when I'm working with companies, we help to put in place a strategy blueprint. And then we meet with them on a regular basis to test their assumptions, to evaluate their results, and to help them to make adjustments along the way so they're focusing on the biggest upside for their company and they're driving value. So if you need any help with this, if you're like, Steve, this sounds great, you can learn more or you can connect with us by going to Coltivar.com. I wish you the very best. And I know from the bottom of my heart, because I've done this over and over again, if you could take strategy and you could take finance, you could tie them together and you could follow a system, then you will be wildly successful in business. All right, that's all I have. Until next time, take care of yourself. Cheers.